You talk about improvements, and you touched on it earlier. I know some of the public infrastructure improvements, aren't they going to have to put that money up in escrow? Yeah, IRG.
They essentially...
That's between the city and IRG.
Between the city and IRG. IRG is already paid for almost everything here. They've already essentially put, they've built the roadways. They've built most of the improvements that are going into this part of the deal. So this is really designed to, at some level, reimburse them for costs that they have, in a sense, advanced to the city for public infrastructure improvements that will be dedicated to the city.
What safeguards are built in if they get into there and find a 90-year-old gas main or things like that? There's got to be some safeguards built in.
They've already done it. They've already built everything that is being financed here. There's a couple of questions that are still, that the city and IRG I know are still working through. One, the dedication question that's supposed to be resolved on Monday. I think when the key engineering department person is back on Monday. This transaction is currently scheduled to close Wednesday of next week, the 27th. Other questions while we're here?
Do we need to vote on it before then?
Yes.
Has the city signed off on this? I know they have been tied into discussions with this. Has the law department given their green light to this?
The law department has given its green light. Subject to final determination on the actual costs that they will, just really a city function. I mean, we are just a property owner here. I mean, that's, I think, a key point. We have an interest in making sure that in enabling this to go forward, because if this doesn't go forward, the TIF itself will probably not really go into effect, and we won't get our compensation, right? I mean, we get compensation as each piece of this is built. We have an interest in payments that derive from the future portions of these properties, and we also have an interest in making sure that our tenant at this point on the stadium is able to utilize the stadium and hold events and make money so that they actually pay, the taxes that are due. I mean, we do. I mean, if it stayed as taxes, we would get the lion's share of that. But at some point, somebody has to be able to pay it, or it will sort of devolve back into, something where we would have to probably step in at some point. And it's, we have worked really hard, I think, on the aspects of this that relate to the REA, which is your reciprocal easement and use. These are your use rights. We have built in essentially backstop provisions into the declaration that we are going to attach to the ground, so that even in the event that there's a full breakdown in this structure at some point, your use rights are protected. If there is a full breakdown, you always have the right to step in. As it sits today, if the taxes are a lien on the property, and if they're unpaid, then we have the right to step in, make advances, hold them responsible, kick them out, and figure out how to move on, and sort of go back, get our governmental exemption, the things we've talked about before in terms of an exit strategy. Those things are all still available, and still you need to still keep those in mind in the back of your mind. I mean, in the interest of full disclosure, I mean, there is the risk that this thing does not fully succeed, and that's always in my mind in terms of how I'm thinking about what are your rights on at any step, and because the security for a TIF bond is fundamentally the tax lien, which primes any leases, right? I mean, you can't, if there is a tax lien foreclosure, leases go away, and so that is, We are convinced, and I think that I think all council in the group are convinced that the REA and use rights do not go away. Like that stays with the land even after a tax lien foreclosure. But, and that gets you most of what you want. I mean, right, that gets you most of what you need for the next 96 years. But we have backstopped that in ways through the declaration to make it clear that even if we're wrong about that question, which we don't think we are, the declaration protects you in a couple of different ways on those use rights. And then I think on the fee, as I said, we've said before, the key point on the fee has always been that the taxes are the taxes, they have to be paid. The tax lien follows that. What we refused to agree to was to tie the obligations that are secured by the tax lien to the bonds themselves in any way. It only relates to, the actual taxes that would be due anyway.
So all this movement would tell me that Plain Local School District dropped their
Yes. It was,
objection to the value of the statement?
They did for now. I think that they, I would guess, we are, as part of that agreement, we and they are agreeing not to challenge the valuation that exists essentially today. The auditor said it's 40 million. We're agreeing that we won't challenge it to reduce it, but nobody's agreed that we wouldn't challenge it to increase it. My working assumption is that they will. And I don't know whether they'll, if I were them, I would wait a couple of years until you have real revenue coming off the stadium so you have some basis for arguing there are new facts, to the auditor.
Is that why it was valued at what it was valued? Because it cost $170 million to build.
I don't know what it cost, but yes, it cost a lot more than 40.
Yeah. So is that part of that equation?
Absolutely, yes, it is. And I know that the auditor has spent a lot of time and effort, and I know he got a lot of pressure to at least, I think the actual bond issue we're doing, I think, has dropped to about 10 million, a little over 10 million from 11.5. The reason it dropped to 10 million from 11.5 was because the auditor came back at 40 million instead of 45 million. And, that was what the purchaser and the developer were essentially arguing to him for. But he said, they wanted 45.
They wanted 45.
Because that would have allowed them to leverage an extra $1.5 million off of the TIF bonds. And he refused. He said, I believe, to the extent I can tell, I believe it's, really more like 40 million. We can always revisit it, later if the facts warrant. I think that's, putting words in his mouth, but I wasn't saying, but that's essentially it.
So in 3 years, that would be assessed again.
It will.
What happens then?
Yeah, I don't know what is your sexennial, triennial, and
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is, you've got clearly whenever the sexennial is, there will be a new look. In between now and then, any school district can challenge the value. And as I said, my working assumption is that there will be a challenge to try to increase it. I think, for this board, I'll just leave you with this. I guess my view is you have mixed view of that. I think my view is you do. If the value is increased substantially, you have a stake in that. You will get, as long as payments are being made, you will get a piece of all those payments. On the other hand, you do want to make sure that the tenant can keep paying, so you want it to be successful. And you also want to take into account the fact that in a full breakdown scenario, you may have to step in, and at least for the short term, those obligations would be the school districts while you work through your exit strategy. So that's, I think, the way I would think about it if I was this board. And maybe you just don't take any position at all, because and let the facts sort of play out.
When do we vote? Yeah, so we have a resolution here, so a couple questions. One, is that ready to go?
It is.
So now it's the board's discretion in terms of, today, we need, or not, we need to call another special meeting because there's a tight timeline. So,
Well, I can tell you, and I'll speak for myself, whether I'm a person or not, there is no chance we're voting on that tonight. We're going to have the ability to at least have some conversation and or look at it and make sure, and that's not a reflection on you.
Understood.
But it just seems to be a recurring theme that everything's last minute. And it just concerns me that we just can't do this as a district on the fly like this. We've got to do our diligence just like we did do the estoppel. You know, we cookie cuttered it and did that, and that's my approach on this, to where we can have a discussion about can we get back together and do a quick meeting, but, you know, I'm going to have to be able to, you know, take my time to look through that and make sure it is where it's at, and no reflection on you, Jeff. It's just,
JR,
you're getting the document for them, and it seems to be the reoccurring thing that just concerns me, that we've got to have time to vet that.
which is, and I will just tell you that they think that we're, how do I say this?
They're not
Did I read
elected,
said to
we
me?
are.
No, I understand. I'm just,
Right.
and I've got copies of both. There's two declarations, one for Scott Field and one for
And I say, all right,
for the
IRG,
stadium.
that's not my.
Understood.
Yeah, it's IRG.
But I know that counsel to the purchaser and IRG have essentially said to me that, you know, we're the only people who are getting any benefit from the declaration at this point, from what we're putting on our ground, because we're getting the REA, we're specifically limiting our liability in any number of ways. And it includes, like, even if we were to, you know, end up taking the property back, it's all subject to available funds, appropriation of funds. I mean, this school district has no personal liability on any of it. But, you know, are there risks that we're addressing in that document? Yes. And I'm happy I brought enough copies for everybody to, you know, sit and take one, if that's what you want. I also brought a copy of the resolution. It is my typical resolution, which lays out.
Boilerplate?
Well, no, it's three. It's
Big boilerplate.
It's 3 pages of recitals about what it is we're talking about and why we're talking about it and agreeing to it and why it is in the best interest of the school district to proceed.
so my question is, so what's our deadline?
Somebody mentioned 27th. You mentioned 27th.
The closing is the 27th as of right now. It could slide as far as the 28th, although I would not